really running into a pandemic such as COVID, most of our insureds do know what their risk exposure is. Now, really then what we should be focusing on is actually what those disturbances could be, such as choke points. So for example, we've got a huge amount of manufacturing in China, both for our insureds and for insureds all over the world. Obviously, any delay or disturbance in that manufacturing part of the chain will mean that you then cannot distribute your product, you will then not be able to sell your product. So the financial ramifications as a result could be quite severe. So really companies are therefore going away and they're having to assess the short term, the mid-term and also the long-term result of what has happened with COVID. So in terms of the short term, it really could be something as simple as diversifying your supply chain, working with more hubs, reducing the level of choke points that you have in place, putting manufacturing in other areas outside of quarantine as well. In the mid-term, it's more about assessing your operational risk, working internally to look at your supply chain and see where those vulnerabilities are, and then more so in the long term, looking at working with third parties who do have specialist resources and can model risk, i.e. they can look at what your future, your past and also your present risk may look like and allow you to build infrastructure and framework around your supply chain to make it more commercially viable.
Insurers can't take away supply chain risk, but they can make supply chains more resilient. Typical supply chain products cover property damage, related business interruption, and in some instances, consequential financial loss, including loss of profit. Working with insurers enables businesses to transfer the risk from their own balance sheet onto that of underwriters, and this secures their supply chain dependent income as well as making their supply chain more resilient.
The immediate response of any client during the height of pandemic or any large disruption within supply chain will always be, do I have cover for this? And actually, typically what you tend to find is that lots of the policies we see for supply chain are based on physical loss or damage. So the answer is normally no. Now, there have always been supply chain disruption products out there. However, they tend to be costly and quite labour intensive to put together. Each client has a different exposure, therefore each product needs to be entirely different. But what we have seen as a result of the pandemic is perhaps a slight resurgence in requirement for that coverage in order to ensure a firm's financial resiliency.
Nationalising supply chains removes the risk of the overseas element. However, what we find is it concentrates the risk in a much smaller territory and also with much fewer suppliers. Therefore, it does not solve the problem, it just moves it closer to home. There are other options available out there. We suggest properly assessing and reviewing the supply chain to discover where the pinch points are and to address those specifically. We encourage people to spread their risk among multiple suppliers and different territories, again, spreading the risk. And finally, utilising technology, digitalising the supply chain and enhancing data to give real live updates on what is going on and how to adapt to challenges.
Every insured is different, as is every territory that we work with. So any differences that we can highlight will be hugely variable, is the best way to put it. From a cargo perspective, if we look at the pure physical loss or damage, a shortened supply chain or an amended supply chain will probably mean lesser cost on an insurance front. Insurers will always attach a higher premium to anything with kind of an import-export element than anything that is retained inland and locally. However, if we were to look at the trade disruption perspective, the kind of the financial resiliency risk, we're going to see something quite different. Shortening the supply chain will not always mean a better supply chain. An isolation of goods in a certain area can still be a choke point, and that can still represent quite a large financial issue for any one insurer.
Standard supply chain risks focus on physical loss or damage to the asset itself. In addition, we can look at business interruption, which typically has a physical damage trigger as well. What COVID-19 has really highlighted is the snap in the supply chain and the significant losses that can be incurred without the physical loss or damage. Now, there are products available, products such as trade disruption insurance, which can be tailored around specific needs to address particular vulnerabilities. Those require no physical loss or damage trigger. In addition to that, there are specialist epidemic risk insurance policies, and these are tailored to such events such as COVID-19. And these can cover increased cost of workings, loss of profit, where a snap in the supply chain has prevented manufacturers from being able to produce their products and distribute them out to their clients.